The Russian Revolution: How Russia Became the First Communist State. By me, Jade. What was the Russian Revolution? The Russian Revolution was a conflict of political and social reform that was fought between 1918 to 1923. This conflict followed the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II, which resulted in the placement of a provisional government that lasted 7 months before it revolted upon itself, leading to the Russian Revolution. This was fought between the Communist Red Army and the anti-Communist White Army. This led to Russia abandoning its previous monarchy and adopting the communist government it uses today. Before we continue, what is communism? Communism is a type of government as well as an economic system, which is a way of creating and sharing wealth. In a communist system, individual people do not own land, factories, or machinery, unlike capitalism. Instead, the government or the whole community owns these things. Everyone is supposed to share the wealth that they create. This type of government was very appealing to the Russians of that time because they had just gotten out of a very dysfunctional monarchy and were suffering from a severe separation of class. Alright, the prequel to the Russian Revolution. Tsar Nicholas II was the last Tsar of Russia, ruling from 1894 to 1917, when he was abdicated from the throne. His rule was plagued with political and social unrest, starting with his terrible performance in the Russo-Japanese War, where Nicholas's dream of turning Russia into a global power was crushed. This, accompanied with the Bloody Sunday Massacre, where peaceful protesters were shot down in St. Petersburg in 1905, and the outbreak of World War I, simply served to accelerate tension and dislike for the Tsar in Russia. After the February Revolution, he was forced to abdicate his throne, and with that ending the Russian monarchy. On your right is a picture of him and our vocabulary: abdicate, renounce one's throne, and Tsar, an emperor of Russia. The end of the Russian monarchy, the February Revolution. On March 8, 1917, a mob in Petrograd began to form, protesting low wages and food shortages. The mob was unorganized and had no true leaders, so at first the authorities paid no real attention to the uprising, their only precaution being keeping the mob out of the center of the city. However, by March 11th, the mob had grown exponentially and included all of Petrograd's workforce, and had started to express violent intentions. The Prime Minister, Nikolai Golitsyn, tried to disperse the crowd through force, but it only served to anger the mob. By March 12th, the mob had managed to storm their way through the barricade of soldiers and into the center of the city, and at last Nicholas had to abdicate his throne. This was known as the February Revolution, and on your right is a picture of that supposed mob. The October Revolution, the sequel to the prequel to the Russian Revolution. This still isn't the Russian Revolution, I just didn't have enough space for it in the title. To appease the people and prevent another conflict, the Duma, which were the ruling authorities of the previous Russian monarchy, set up a provisional government to be taken control of by the people. Three social parties took control of this provisional government: the capitalist Mensheviks, the communist Bolsheviks, and the socialist revolutionaries. With this alliance, a period of political peace was finally achieved. This, however, was short-lived. 7 months later, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, overthrew the provisional government and seized power, effectively making Russia the first communist country in the world. By the way, it's still 1917. This was known as the October Revolution, and in the bottom we have a picture of two of the social parties mentioned, the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. The socialist revolutionaries are not shown here. I'm not even sure if they have a logo. Alright, now we're going to be getting to the actual Russian Revolution. Now, how did the Russian Revolution start? The Russian Revolution began to take form when the Bolshevik leader Lenin Vladimir accepted the disliked Brest-Litovsk treaty with Germany, which announced Russia's leave from World War I, and this caused many of the other political factions of Russia to perceive the new Bolshevik government to be weak, and resulted in them loosely allying together to form the anti-Bolshevik movement, known as the White Army. This group included monarchists, militarists, socialists, capitalists, and for some time foreign nations. The two fought for control over the country until 1923, when the Red Army defeated the White Army. Alright, the start of the Russian Revolution after the signing of the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, which is shown in the left, many political factions began to ally against the Bolsheviks, as said in the previous slide. In response to this, the Bolsheviks expelled any anti-Bolshevik deputies from the government and implanted a secret police, known as the Cheka, to arrest and kill suspects of the anti-Bolshevik movement, which became known as the White Army. By the end of 1917, the Bolsheviks, who became known as the Red Army, only effectively controlled the center of Russia from Petrograd to Moscow, while the Whites gained power in Ukraine and Omsk, support from the Allies who were trying to find another front for World War I, and other groups who opposed the idea of communism. This included Ukrainian nationalists, Mensheviks, and the Socialist Revolutionaries. The Allies, who were previously allied with the Whites, were confused by the political struggles between the Communist Reds and the anti-Bolshevik Whites, and withdrew their support by 1919 without contributing anything major to the war. The Russian Revolution. In 1918, the Whites declared war over the Bolsheviks, expressing their intent to rid Russia of communism. During the first half of 1919, the Whites, led by Pyotr Wrangel and Alexander Kolchak, won many battles against the Red Army, but on April 28, 1920, the Red Army started their counterattack, taking back cities that had been invaded and causing White forces to retreat. Kolchak's armies were forced to retreat to Irkutsk, and Kolchak made an administration there. Before Kolchak could counterattack the Bolsheviks, a revolution in December by the Socialist Revolutionaries stopped him in his tracks, and Kolchak was captured and then handed over to the Bolsheviks. Elsewhere, Anton Denikin, another leader of the White Army, was trying to take over the European front of Russia. In September, White forces commanded by Anton Denikin moved north towards Moscow, and on October 13th, they invaded Oryol. At the same time, Nikolai Yudenik led White forces to the outskirts of Petrograd, St. Petersburg, but both armies were driven back by Red Army counterattacks. Yudenik retreating to Estonia, while Denikin retreated to Oryol, both armies being devastated beyond repair. By the end of 1920, the only organized White force was in Crimea, led by Pyotr Wrangel, who headed northward, occupying Ukraine and Kuban. Eventually, the Red Army battered the White forces to the point of surrender, effectively ending the Russian Civil War in 1923. The Russian Revolution aftermath. It is estimated that 15 million lives were lost as a result of the Russian Civil War, most of them being civilian. Thousands who were suspected of being part of the anti-Bolshevik movement were murdered by the Cheka, and life for the peasants of Russia was still miserable. Diseases and malnutrition plagued the peasants, and with the breakdown of the transportation, which was the product of the Whites interfering with the Trans-Siberian Railway, prevented distribution of supplies throughout Russia. However, Russia finally set its course and became the first communist country, of which it still is today. And that's how Russia became the first communist country. And that's the end of this presentation. Now, if I've done my job correctly, you should know all about the Russian Revolution, and with that knowledge, a tidbit about the founding of the USSR. But that's for another PowerPoint presentation.